We are inherently social creatures, constantly communicating with each other, learning new things, sharing experiences. In fact, we're so naturally hardwired to communicate and to socialize that it would seem that every few years we have a dozen or so new startups for the next big social media platform coming out. And this shouldn't be any too big surprise, given how innately and desirably we find language and the communication expression of ourselves to be. Language is this amazing tool that we've come up with to describe meaning to things, to communicate, to convey a complex set of instructions. And this language tool that we have, it has a near infinite possibility of sentences. Language, no matter the form, tends to have a very deep emphasis placed upon the syntax and grammar of the semantic meaning of a sentence to be understood. This, however, poses a slight problem, and that's how is a tool this complex first learned without already knowing language? How do you teach someone to speak without them knowing how to speak? You can't communicate with them very directly. Luckily, we've sort of narrowed this down to a degree. This enigma of language acquisition we can sort of break down into three overarching categories. The first are the small basic building blocks of sound native to a specific language. We call these phonemes. Any of the perceptually distinct sounds in a specific language that distinguish one word from another. For example, a P, a B, D, or T in English are words pad, pat, bad, and bat. These phonemes go into this construction of morphemes, like the pat and bad, and other words. And as you build up the chain, you can build more complex series of words with multiple syllables long, or you can make a pretty good, an alright, we'll go with paragraph with just using simple 1 to 2 syllable words. Next, we have the learning and understanding of syntax and grammar rules. In order to be understood and communicate clearly, one must not only be able to understand the rules of language, but also be able to construct sentences abiding to said rules. The growth of vocabulary is the next part here. As we learn the following rules of language, we must also learn the words to relay our desired communication. Otherwise, what good do these all rules do anyway? Through the incredible work of Dr. Patricia Kuhl and her team of scientists at the University of Washington, we've been able to accurately create models and predictions of what phonemes a baby would learn in specific environments. And we did this through a series of very interesting experiments. We started by taking a native English-speaking child of typically 1 to 6 months, and we placed it in a lab, and we played to the left or right of the child phonemes of the English language, typically R's and L's, very prominent phonemes that are played or spoken very often in the English language, things that you will hear a lot of in casual conversation. And to contrast this, we played phonemes that are very common in foreign languages that we barely hear here, sounds, syllables and sounds that don't even really exist in the English language. And what we noticed is that every time we played a common phoneme of the English language, the child turned and cocked its head, looking for its mother. And virtually to every other sound that we played, no reaction was really given. And to contrast this, we then took those same children and we exposed them for just a few hours to a Mandarin mother. And we had the Mandarin mother speak to the child in the exact same way that she would speak to her own child. The same ubiquitous baby-ness that's found across cultures. And then we took it back to the lab and we played Mandarin phonemes, English phonemes, and other foreign sounds. And we noticed that the baby now recognized and turned its head to listen for the Mandarin phonemes as well as the English ones. Which shows us something really interesting, that as the babies learn and grow, as they pick up these sounds from their mothers, They're building what's described as a mental lexicon of basic sounds. These basic sounds are what's going to go on to build words and sentences eventually. B.F. Skinner originally argued that babies learn language through a purely behaviorist perspective, utilizing operant conditioning, imitation, prompting, and shaping. This idea was eventually challenged by a legendary linguist and thinker, Noam Chomsky, claiming that language was too complex, and instead there are innate synaptic rules hardwired into our brain.
In advance of experience, the child is already equipped with an understanding of the basic structure of any human language. So we know, even in advance of inquiry, that there's going to be a fundamental invariant core to language.
Chomsky claimed that this universal grammar had to have a biological origin due to the complex rules and functions of syntax and grammar being either impossible or incredibly convoluted in explanation via behaviorist theories. In relatively recent years, new research has furthered our understanding of semantics. This new theory stems not from the original roots of behaviorism, but instead from the understanding of our neural networks. This approach relies on our web of neurons to exploit the tendency for language to be full of probabilistic constraints. Similar to the research of Dr. Kuhl modeling the mental lexicon or the spreadsheet of prime sounds a baby will eventually use, Chain, Dell, and Bach, as well as Seidenberg, found models could be created to model the creation and placement of syllables within sentences. Extrapolating that to the similarly archaic grammar rules could also be deduced within said system. And within as little as 2 minutes of exposure to speech, infants could use these probability of syllable pairs occurring within the experimenter's discretion of given sentences to the child to distinguish words from similar words in which the syllables were rearranged. With as little as 2 minutes to exposure to speech, infants could use what we assume to be a probability of syllable pairs occurring within and between experimenter-defined words to distinguish these words from similar words in which the syllables were rearranged. The same type of probabilistic constraints are present within all sentences. And the rate at which these infants were able to deduce these syllables of words accurately reflected the results of the model of Bell and Deck and Seidenberg. The gradual development and fine-tuning of neural networks during early linguistic experience play an important role in the rapid learning of language, as well as the cross-cultural consistency in the rate of language development. By being able to deduce syllables and word placements, we are able not only to extrapolate to grammar and syntax rules, but also meanings. And that gets us into our third part, the acquisition of vocabulary. It may be surprising to you, but you actually learned vocabulary faster than it was taught to you. Matter of fact, it seems all children do. Children from birth to adulthood are estimated to learn about 60,000 words, roughly 8 to 10 words a day. The vast majority of said words are learned without direct instruction, instead coming from other avenues like conversations and reading. And according to numerous child reading studies, grade school children learn one new word approximately every 20 paragraphs. This, coupled with the fact that the average 7th grader reads less than 50 paragraphs a day, a margin that would only net them less than 2, maybe 3 new words, lead us to believe that there is another mechanism for vocabulary acquisition at play. The theory of learning things not explicitly taught or shown is called latent semantic analysis. It's a concept employed a lot by the search algorithms of tech giants like Google. LSA, abbreviated, is a technique often used to analyze the semantic distributions and relationships between a set of documents or terms. In this case, researchers led by Dr. Dow of the University of Colorado and Dr. Dumas of the Information Sciences Research of Morristown, New Jersey, created an LSA model where the terms were the current words learned by a child, where each word is associated not only with its meaning, but other synonyms and common word placement within a sentence, like a Sudoku puzzle, where the more it's filled out, the easier and more accurate assumptions of other yet-to-be words are. A common thread that can be pulled within these facets of language acquisition, when that our developing brains take in aggregate information, what we speak, hear, and read, of our native language and analyzes them for potential connectivity, utilizing them to deduce rules, words, and nuances of a given language, is very fascinating. And it really shows the ingenious network at play here. Merely by hearing enough words, we can predict what kind of word would fit in a sentence, how to place syllables, predict other antonyms and synonyms of words we already know. However, before we end our talk today, I'd like to offer just one word of caution, and that's even though immense thought and hard work has been put into these models, and these models predict very accurately the rate of which real children learn, these are not literal representations of how our brains function. Our brains don't literally pull together a giant LSA algorithm to sift through everything we know. Instead, think more how our neurons are constantly firing and interconnected sporadically, deeply woven together to form our semantic knowledge. And that these theories and explanations, they do align with the evidence we can gather. But remember, our brains are incredibly ambiguous from the outside, trifling to try to measure, and likely the most complex structures we'll ever encounter. Down the road, future research may solidify these theories or construct brand new, entirely unthought explanations. And just like how B.F. Skinner and many others are groundbreaking scientists for their time, ideas eventually get old, and new, often better ones get replaced. So remember the old adage, more research is always needed. So remember to support our scientists.